There is a moment in life that an avoidant never prepares for. It is not when someone chases them. It is not when someone cries, begs, or fights for their attention. They are used to that. They know how to handle longing. They know how to handle emotional intensity. They know how to handle chaos. What they are not prepared for is calm strength. What they are not prepared for is someone who feels deeply but does not collapse. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, something shifts in the air before either of them can name it. The connection feels different from the beginning. There is depth without pressure, warmth without demand, attention without suffocation. The avoidant feels safe, almost suspiciously safe, and the healed empath feels something too. They feel the walls, they feel the distance behind the charm. But unlike the old version of themselves, they do not rush to tear those walls down. They simply stand there grounded in their own emotional center. And that is where the story truly begins. Because an avoidant is used to being the one who holds the emotional power, they are used to pulling away and watching someone lean closer. They are used to silence that triggers pursuit. But this time, something feels off. This time, their usual moves do not land the same way. This time, the person in front of them is not trying to win them. They are simply showing up as they are, and that unsettles the avoidant in a way they cannot yet explain. If you have ever been the healed empath in this dynamic, you know the quiet strength it takes to stay centered. And if you have ever been the avoidant, you know how deeply uncomfortable it feels when someone does not play the role you expected them to play. To understand what happens next, you have to understand the avoidant's usual pattern. Their relationships often follow a script they do not consciously write, but know by heart. At first, there is charm, curiosity, a slow unfolding that feels intoxicating because it is controlled. They give just enough vulnerability to create connection, but never enough to feel exposed. The other person starts to lean in. They begin investing emotionally. And when the connection starts to feel real, when intimacy begins asking for consistency, the avoidant feels their nervous system tighten. Distance becomes their protection. They pull back slightly. Not enough to end things, just enough to regain control. In most cases, this is where the other person panics. They text more, they question, they try harder, they attempt to prove their worth, and that reaction restores the avoidant's sense of safety. The power dynamic rebalances. The avoidant feels wanted, but not trapped, needed, but not consumed. This push and pull becomes familiar, predictable. It allows the avoidant to stay emotionally involved without ever fully surrendering. But when they meet a healed empath, that familiar script begins to malfunction because the healed empath has already lived through the cycle. They have already chased, they have already begged, they have already tried to earn love by overgiving. And they have learned, they have done the work to understand their own attachment wounds. They have faced their fear of abandonment. They no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. So when the avoidant pulls back for the first time, the reaction is not panic, it is pause, and that pause is powerful. The healed empath is not cold. They are not detached. They still feel everything deeply. They still care, but they no longer abandon themselves in the process. They understand that love is not proven through anxiety. They understand that real connection does not require self-sacrifice. So when the avoidant begins to create space, the healed empath does something unfamiliar. They allow it. They do not flood the silence with reassurance-seeking messages. They do not create drama to pull the avoidant back in. They simply continue living their life. They maintain their routines, their friendships, their passions. And from the outside, this looks effortless. But inside, it is a conscious choice. It is the result of healing. The avoidant notices this immediately, even if they do not admit it. There is no emotional chase following their withdrawal. No surge of desperation confirming their importance. Instead, there is steadiness. And steadiness feels foreign. It feels almost like indifference. The avoidant may even test the waters, pulling back slightly more to see what happens. Surely this person will react now. Surely they will show fear. But again, the healed empath responds with grounded energy. They might communicate calmly. They might say they value consistency, but they do not beg for it. This is where the avoidant begins to feel something unfamiliar creeping in. It is not boredom, it is not lack of chemistry. It is uncertainty, because for the first time, they cannot read the emotional leverage in the room. At first, the avoidant might interpret the healed empath's calmness as compatibility. There is no pressure, no overwhelming emotional demands. The connection feels easy, conversations flow, laughter comes naturally. The avoidant feels seen but not dissected, appreciated but not clung to. This creates a sense of relief. They might think they have finally found someone low maintenance, someone independent, someone who does not require too much. And in a way, that is true. The healed empath does not require constant validation because they validate themselves. They do not need to be chased because they choose themselves first. But what the avoidant does not yet understand is that this independence is not emotional distance, it is emotional security, and security holds a quiet power. As the bond deepens, subtle intimacy begins to form. The healed empath listens without trying to fix. They offer warmth without expectation. They share their inner world without oversharing to force closeness. This balanced vulnerability slowly lowers the avoidance guard. They begin opening up in small, careful ways. Maybe they share a childhood memory. Maybe they reveal a fear disguised as humor. And each time, the healed empath receives it gently. No judgment, no pressure to go further than they are ready to go. For a moment, the avoidant feels something rare. They feel emotionally safe. But safety has layers, and as emotional safety grows, so does the potential for real intimacy. And real intimacy is where the avoidant's deeper fears begin to stir. The first real test comes quietly. It is not dramatic. It might be a delayed response, a canceled plan, a slight emotional withdrawal. Something subtle but intentional. The avoidant creates a small gap almost instinctively to measure the reaction. In past relationships, this gap would have triggered anxiety. Questions would flood in. Reassurance would be demanded. But this time, there is space. The healed empath notices the shift, but instead of reacting impulsively, they observe. They might send one calm message, or they might simply allow the silence to exist. They trust that if the connection is mutual, it will stabilize. And if it does not, they will survive. This quiet confidence shakes something inside the avoidant. Because suddenly, the usual power dynamic is gone. There is no emotional tug of war. No proof that they are the center of someone's world. Instead, they feel something unexpected. They feel the possibility of being optional. And for an avoidant, that realization can be deeply unsettling. They are used to leaving before being left. They are used to controlling distance. But now they sense that if they drift too far, the healed empath will not chase them into the dark. The healed empath will let them go with grace. That awareness creates a new emotion rising beneath the surface. It is not fear of engulfment, it is fear of loss. And fear of loss is unfamiliar territory. Because when an avoidant meets a healed empath, the game they unconsciously relied on no longer works. There is no chaos to hide behind, no drama to distract from vulnerability. There is only clarity, and clarity forces choice. Lean in and grow, or step back and repeat old patterns alone. And that choice begins forming long before either of them says it out loud. The avoidant starts to feel something they cannot easily categorize. It is not the usual irritation that comes when someone gets too close. It is not the suffocation they fear. It is something more subtle, more destabilizing. They feel seen, not exposed in a dramatic way, not interrogated, but quietly understood. The healed empath begins to mirror patterns back without accusation. When distance appears, they do not attack it. They gently acknowledge it. When mixed signals show up, they do not spiral. They calmly name what they observe. And this calm reflection acts like a mirror the avoidant did not ask for, because for the first time, their behavior is not triggering chaos. It is being noticed with clarity, and clarity removes the hiding places. The avoidant may start to feel restless. They might question why this connection feels heavier, even though it is more peaceful. They might subconsciously try to provoke insecurity just to restore familiarity. A slightly colder tone, a longer silence, a hint of emotional unavailability. They are not always aware they are doing it. It is instinct. It is muscle memory. But the healed empath does something different again. They do not absorb the behavior. They do not personalize it. They do not shrink to keep the connection. Instead, they hold their ground emotionally. and that grounded presence becomes impossible to ignore. As the power dynamic continues to shift, something deeper awakens in the avoidance nervous system. They realize they are not in control the way they used to be, not because the healed empath is manipulating them, but because there is nothing to manipulating them. But because there is nothing to manipulating. The empath's security removes the leverage. There is no insecurity to pull on, no abandonment fear to trigger. The avoidant may begin to feel subtle anxiety rising, where confidence once lived. They may overanalyze interactions. They may wonder if they are losing interest, when in reality they are losing control, and that feels unfamiliar. The healed empath, meanwhile, senses the shift, but does not chase clarity aggressively. They might express a boundary gently, something simple but firm. A statement like, "I value consistency," or "I need emotional honesty to feel connected." No threats, no ultimatums, just standards. And standards feel different from demands. Demands feel like pressure. Standards feel like self-respect. The avoidant now stands at a psychological crossroads. In the past, they could withdraw, and the other person would lower their standards to keep them. But this time, lowering standards does not happen. The healed empath does not punish them. They simply do not bend, and that quiet strength begins to stir something unexpected in the avoidant: respect. Because deep down, avoidants often admire strength. They cannot destabilize. Intimacy now begins to feel real. Not intense, not chaotic, not built on trauma bonding or emotional roller coasters. It feels steady, predictable in a healthy way. And that steadiness can feel more frightening than drama, because drama gives the avoidant something to react to. Steadiness invites them to participate. The healed empath continues showing up authentically. They share their emotions without flooding the connection. They express appreciation without idolizing. They remain warm without overextending. And in that warmth, the avoidant begins to soften in small moments. They may linger a little longer in conversation. They may initiate vulnerability in subtle ways. They may even feel a growing desire for closeness that surprises them. But with closeness comes exposure. And exposure activates old survival instincts. The avoidance nervous system may interpret this deepening bond as risk. What if I lose myself? What if I am depended on? What if I disappoint? Instead of recognizing these fears consciously, they may start creating distance again, a shift in energy, a slight coldness, a pulling back that feels confusing to the healed empath, but not devastating, because the healed empath now understands something crucial. If someone pulls away when intimacy deepens, it is often fear speaking, not truth. And understanding this does not mean tolerating it endlessly. It means observing it without collapsing. This is where the emotional mirror effect becomes undeniable. The healed empath begins reflecting the avoidance actions in real time, not to shame them, not to control them, but to stay aligned with their own needs. If communication becomes inconsistent, the empath matches that energy without hostility. If emotional availability decreases, they invest slightly less as well. This balanced response removes the imbalance the avoidant is used to. Suddenly, their withdrawal does not create pursuit. It creates distance, and real distance carries consequence. The avoidant may feel a quiet panic rising in their chest. They might reach out unexpectedly. They might attempt to reestablish closeness, not through grand gestures, but through subtle reconnecting. And for the first time, they may feel something they rarely allow themselves to feel: the fear of being left, the realization that this person will not orbit around them indefinitely. The healed empath is not threatening to leave. They are simply unwilling to stay where they are not met. And that difference changes everything, because now the avoidant must confront a truth they have avoided for years. If they continue protecting themselves from vulnerability, they may lose the one connection that felt genuinely safe. And here the story reaches its most delicate turning point. The avoidant stands between two futures. In one future, they retreat fully. They convince themselves the connection was not right. They find small flaws and magnify them. They tell themselves they need more space, more independence, more time. They escape before the fear of loss becomes too real. In the other future, they do something far more terrifying. They stay. They acknowledge the fear instead of running from it. They communicate, even if their voice shakes internally. They begin practicing vulnerability in small doses. The healed empath does not rush this process. They do not demand transformation overnight. They simply continue showing up consistently while holding boundaries. If the avoidant chooses growth, something powerful begins forming. A relationship not built on pursuit and retreat, but on conscious effort. If the avoidant chooses escape, something else happens that they did not expect. The healed empath grieves, but they do not break. They feel the sadness fully. They honor the connection, but they do not chase closure. That does not come. They release with dignity. And that dignity lingers in the avoidance mind long after distance is created, because unlike past connections, this one cannot be rewritten as toxic or dramatic. It cannot be dismissed as needy or overwhelming. It was calm. It was balanced. It was real. And that reality becomes a mirror the avoidant carries with them. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, one of two transformations occurs. Either the avoidant evolves beyond their fear, or they walk away knowing they encountered something rare and were not ready to receive it. And if you are the healed empath listening to this, understand something deeply. Your strength is not in fixing someone, it is in staying whole while loving them. And whether they rise to meet you or retreat into old patterns, your healing remains yours. That is the true power in this connection. That is the true power in this connection. And yet, even after distance is created or growth begins, the emotional impact does not simply disappear. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, something permanent is imprinted on both of them. If the avoidant chose to retreat, they may initially feel relief. Space returns, independence feels restored, their nervous system settles back into familiar territory. There is no expectation waiting in their phone, no quiet standard reflecting back at them. But relief has layers, and once the silence stretches long enough, reflection begins. They remember the steadiness. They remember the way conflict never escalated into chaos. They remember feeling understood without being pressured, and that memory lingers differently than past relationships. It does not burn with drama. It echoes with calm. And calm can be haunting when you realize you walked away from it. For the healed empath, if the avoidant left, the pain is real, but it is processed differently now. They do not internalize the abandonment as proof of unworthiness. They sit with the grief. They feel the disappointment. But beneath it, there is clarity. They know they showed up honestly. They know they did not shrink, and that knowing becomes a form of closure. If the avoidant chose to stay instead of run, the transformation is slow and fragile. Growth does not look dramatic. It looks like small admissions. It looks like saying, I struggle with closeness sometimes. It looks like responding instead of withdrawing. It looks like tolerating discomfort instead of escaping it. The healed empath recognizes these efforts immediately, not because they are desperate for progress, but because they are attuned to emotional shifts. They respond with encouragement, not rescue. They do not take over the healing process. They allow the avoidant to own it. And this ownership is crucial, because when an avoidant grows for someone else, it breeds resentment. But when they grow because they are tired of repeating loneliness, something deeper changes. Still, there will be moments where old patterns try to resurface. A stressful week, a vulnerable conversation, a future plan that feels too permanent. The instinct to withdraw may flicker again, but now there is awareness, and awareness interrupts autopilot. The healed empath remains steady, but they are no longer overcompensating for emotional gaps. They expect reciprocity, and that expectation raises the standard of the entire connection. One of the most powerful shifts in this dynamic happens internally, where no one else can see it. The avoidant begins questioning their long-held beliefs about intimacy. They may have believed that needing someone equals weakness, that independence means emotional distance. That love inevitably leads to loss of self, but the healed empath challenges these beliefs simply by existing differently. They demonstrate that you can care deeply without clinging, that you can love without controlling, that you can give without abandoning yourself. And slowly, the avoidant's rigid definitions begin to soften. This does not happen in a single conversation. It happens in quiet moments, in the way the empath respects their space but does not disappear, in the way they express hurt calmly instead of explosively. in the way they walk away from disrespect without threatening. These experiences rewrite internal narratives, and rewriting narratives is uncomfortable. It requires vulnerability. It requires admitting that past defenses may have protected them once, but are isolating them now. For the healed empath watching this unfold, there is both hope and caution. Hope that growth is possible, caution that growth must be sustained, because potential alone is not enough anymore. There is also a deeper emotional layer few people talk about. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, the avoidant often feels grief, not necessarily for the current relationship, but for past versions of themselves. They may realize how many connections they sabotaged, how many people they kept at arm's length, how often they mistook safety for boredom and chaos for chemistry. This realization can be heavy. It can stir regret, and regret is a vulnerable emotion. The healed empath, if still present, does not shame them for it. They hold space without absorbing responsibility for it, because they understand something essential. Healing cannot be forced. It can only be chosen. And if the avoidant fully steps into that choice, intimacy begins to feel less like a trap and more like partnership. Communication becomes clearer. Emotional reactions become less extreme. Trust builds slowly, brick by brick, not through grand promises, but through consistency. And consistency is the language both of them begin learning to speak fluently. In the end, what truly happens when an avoidant meets a healed empath is not a fairy tale. It is a confrontation with fear, with old wounds, with survival strategies that once made sense but no longer serve growth. For the avoidant, it is the realization that not every strong person will chase them into intimacy. Some will stand still and invite them forward instead. For the healed empath, it is the proof that loving someone does not require losing themselves. It is the confirmation that boundaries do not push away the right people, they filter out the unready ones. And whether this connection evolves into something lasting or becomes a powerful lesson, it leaves both changed. The avoidant can never again say they have not experienced steady love. The healed empath can never again forget their own strength. And if you are listening to this as someone who has loved an avoidant while being healed yourself, understand this deeply. Your calm was not weakness. Your boundaries were not cruelty. Your refusal to chase was not indifference. It was growth. And growth shakes people who are comfortable in dysfunction. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, one of two things happens. Either fear wins temporarily or healing begins permanently. But in both outcomes, something profound is revealed. Real love is not loud. It is not chaotic. It is not built on anxiety. It is built on two people willing to face themselves. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is remain whole in the presence of someone still learning how. And whether they rise to meet you or retreat into old patterns, your healing remains yours. That is the true power in this connection. But the story does not end there. Because even if the avoidant walks away, something irreversible has already happened inside them. They have felt what secure love feels like. They have experienced closeness without chaos. And once someone tastes that kind of connection, it lingers. At first, they may try to suppress it. They may distract themselves. They may tell themselves it was not that deep. But in quiet moments, when there is no one to impress and no emotional performance to maintain, the memory returns. The calm conversations, the absence of pressure, the way they were allowed to be imperfect without being abandoned. That memory becomes uncomfortable because it highlights the difference between what they had and what they usually choose. If they left, they may begin comparing new connections to the healed empath, and something will feel off, either too dramatic, too demanding, too unstable. They may not admit it out loud, but internally they know they encountered something grounded, and instead of leaning in, they ran. This realization can trigger two reactions: growth through reflection, or deeper avoidance to escape regret. If the avoidant chooses reflection, it does not happen overnight. It begins slowly. Maybe they replay conversations in their mind. Maybe they remember the moments when they pulled away and the healed empath did not chase. Instead of feeling powerful, they now feel the loss of something steady. They may begin questioning their patterns. Why do I leave when things get real? Why does calm intimacy make me anxious? Why did I feel safer in chaos than in peace? These questions are uncomfortable. They challenge the identity the avoidant has built around independence. Because many avoidants pride themselves on not needing anyone. But the healed empath quietly exposed a deeper truth. It is not that they do not need connection, it is that they fear depending on it. And dependency feels dangerous when vulnerability has been punished in the past. If the avoidant dares to explore this fear, something shifts internally. They start recognizing that their distance was protection, not preference. Their withdrawal was armor, not personality. And this awareness cracks something open. But awareness alone is not transformation. It requires action. And action requires courage. Meanwhile, the healed empath continues their life. This is important. They do not pause their growth, waiting for someone to catch up. They may feel waves of grief. They may miss the connection deeply, but they do not romanticize inconsistency. They remind themselves gently that love should not feel like emotional guessing. They hold compassion for the avoidant without excusing the behavior. And this balance is what keeps them whole. In the past, they might have tried to rescue. They might have over-explained, over-given, overextended. But now they trust something different. They trust that if someone is meant to stay, they will meet them halfway. This trust is not naive. It is earned, and because of that, their energy changes. They no longer attract dynamics built on imbalance. They radiate self-respect. And self-respect is magnetic in a way. Desperation never is. If the avoidant circles back, they will not find the same person they left. They will find someone even more grounded, even more aware, and that realization can be both intimidating and inspiring. If the avoidant chooses to return, the reunion is not dramatic. It is cautious. There may be subtle outreach, a message that seems casual but carries emotional weight, a conversation that tests whether the door is still open. The healed empath does not slam the door shut, but they also do not fling it wide open. They respond with warmth and boundaries, because reconciliation without growth only repeats cycles, and this time repetition is not an option. The avoidant now feels something different from their usual confidence. They feel accountable. They understand that this connection cannot survive on charm alone. It requires consistency. It requires emotional presence. And this is where their internal battle intensifies. Old instincts whisper, do not get too close. Do not lose control. But a new voice, formed by experience, whispers something else. You felt safe there. You felt understood. Do not sabotage that again. The outcome depends on which voice they feed. Growth is uncomfortable for avoidance because it demands vulnerability without guarantees. But the healed empath is not asking for perfection, only effort, only honesty, only the willingness to stay present when fear arises. And here is the deeper truth that ties everything together. When an avoidant meets a healed empath, the encounter is never meaningless, even if it ends. Even if it transforms into distance, both people leave changed. The avoidant confronts the possibility that love does not have to feel suffocating. The healed empath confirms that they can love deeply without losing themselves. And that is powerful, because the old story of this dynamic was always imbalance, one chasing, one running, one overgiving, one withdrawing. But healing rewrites that script. It creates a new possibility where love is mutual or it is released. If you are the healed empath in this story, understand something with your whole heart. Your job was never to fix someone afraid of intimacy. Your role was to show what healthy connection looks like. And whether they stepped into that light or turned away from it is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their readiness. And if you are the avoidant listening quietly, feeling seen in ways that make you uncomfortable, know this: avoidance once protected you. It kept you safe when closeness felt dangerous. But not every connection is a threat. Some are invitations. Invitations to grow beyond fear. Invitations to experience love without losing yourself. When these two energies meet, something sacred happens. Either two people evolve together into a balanced bond built on courage and clarity, or they part ways, carrying lessons that reshape every future connection. But one thing is certain: after this encounter, neither of them can return to who they were before. And sometimes that transformation alone is the purpose of the meeting.